It's about 86% of the revenues online are coming from the 5% of gamblers who are likely to be addicted or at risk.
The majority of the US population were against sports betting. It was a slow burn at first, but then the ads started coming.
The numbers, they don't pass the smell test. They're misleading, and I think anyone that reads this should know it. This video is brought to you by our generous sponsors, Right Choice Recovery and the Campaign for Fairer Gambling. Check the description of this video for more information about Right Choice's services and for the campaign's mission statement. Last episode, we exposed how gambling addiction is on the rise because of the advertising, the influencers, and social media. Here's the thing. It's not just a culture shift anymore. There's actual numbers to tell you what's happening, data to prove it. The damage being done is measurable. Big numbers, big profit, big harm. In this episode, we're gonna show you exactly how bad it's gotten by showing you some of the numbers. But what's really important to remember is that numbers can kind of be twisted and manipulated to have them say whatever you want them to say. For example, according to my survey, 100% of people are addicted to gambling. But my survey was only the team working on this episode. I'm gonna do my best to provide you with the absolute truth in this episode, unlike some of the groups that we're gonna be talking about a little bit later on. Official numbers say around 2.5 million Americans have a severe gambling addiction. That sounds really big already, right? Well, remember, the way that we report numbers really depends on who's running the study and what questions are being asked. The reality is there's at least another 5 to 8 million Americans, 2 to 3% at minimum, that are struggling with mild or moderate gambling problems. In other words, they don't meet the full diagnostics criteria to be called severe gambling addicts, but they're going through it.
Some of those criteria being that if you're lying to your family, friends, and loved ones about your gambling, or if you're chasing one's losses, if you're increasing your bet sizes, or if you're preoccupied with the thought of your next bet. Those are just some examples of the 9 criteria that one would have to meet.
But even further, we have to remember that these numbers in particular are measuring people who, 1, knew that they had a gambling addiction, and 2, were willing to tell the truth about the fact that they had a gambling problem. This study on substance addiction highlights how self-reported numbers can be a little bit funky. Programs that rely on self-reported substance use may not estimate the exact prevalence of substance use in both research and primary healthcare settings, especially substances that have a higher social stigma. And the same goes with gambling here. When it comes to gambling, there's no drug test. There's no way to tell if a person has been gambling recently. So it's really just if they tell you or if they don't. It's called the hidden disease for a reason.
I guess that's kind of why they call it the hidden addiction, is because nobody saw the negatives and they only saw the positives.
This means that these numbers could be underreported by 10, 20, 25, 50%, just based on what people were willing to share or identified about their own experience. There's stigma. People lie or don't admit the full truth to make it seem a little bit better. Denial or a lack of education about what a gambling addiction is. People with gambling addictions today might just tell themselves that they're bad gamblers and don't have a gambling problem. It's very easy to lie to yourself in that way because it allows you to keep gambling. And then there could be sampling bias. The people that are often struggling the most are usually the hardest to reach. They could be homeless, they could be incarcerated, they could be out of the general population and struggling with addiction. Basically, experts are just guessing to the best of their ability with the data that they get. One study might say that 1 in 50 Americans has a gambling addiction. Realistically, that could be 1 in 25, could be 1 in 20. And it really depends on the demographic that you're interviewing, because there's groups like veterans that are more at risk to develop a gambling addiction.
I got hooked on slot machines in Korea because that's what was in the rooms. And when I came back to the States, of course, because that's what I got hooked on, that's what I sought out.
Here's the truth. You're 30% more likely to have a gambling addiction today than you were back in 2018. And that's on the conservative side. Are we really gonna stick with the data from 1999 that says 1% of Americans have a gambling problem when 38 states and DC have legalized online sports betting and the advertising's being shoved down our throats? Let's talk dollars. The American gaming industry now generates $264 billion of revenue every year, and that number is accurate. It's actually more than the GDP of Greece. You want more scale? That's actually enough money to buy every NFL team and still have billions of dollars left over. But where does that money come from? Where are they making the revenues from? I asked political activist Matt Zarb-Cousin that question. Here's what he had to say.
It's about 86% of the revenues online are coming from the 5% of gamblers who are likely to be addicted or at risk.
86% is an insane number to come from just 5% of the player pool. Imagine if 86% of all liquor sales came from just 5% of drinkers. News outlets would be going crazy over that. Yet no one is talking about it when it comes to gambling. It just doesn't seem to matter. So it seems like the big bucks aren't rolling in from the casual or responsible players, but rather it's coming from the players who are gambling in excess, possibly those with a gambling addiction. That's targeted harm. And with increased access to gambling, meaning increased frequency of play and more people gambling, we're gonna see more people joining that 5%. That number could grow. But the number that's surely gonna grow is the amount of money that gamblers are losing. 94% of sports bets in 2023 were placed online. Why? Because it's fast, it's easy, it's fun, and there's AIs making it appealing to you and you specifically. And the apps themselves, well, they're built for endless engagement. They're actually built by the same Silicon Valley groups that got you to doom scroll this morning before your feet even touched the floor next to your bed.
It develops products that are more likely to get you addicted more quickly, cross-promotes, incentivizes all of those addictive products that you might not have even signed up to bet on, but then it just creates those incentives and inducements to get involved in.
Before 2018, sports betting was relatively small potatoes. There was $4.9 billion wagered in 2017 on sports, legally. Today, $121 billion in 2023. That is an explosion. And gambling addiction grew right alongside it. And there's lots of other aspects of life that are being affected as well. I mean, the probability of a problem gambler's relationship ending up in a divorce if they got married is 53.5%. I wanted to know what America actually thinks about the rise of gambling, about the rise of sports betting. We usually only get the opinions from the extreme sides, the gambling industry or the people that want to see it destroyed. But what does the average person in the United States think about gambling? I spoke to Dr. Daniel Ledick, a marketing professor from Seton Hall University who's been polling America for years about sports, sports advertising, and how they feel about sports betting.
The Seton Hall Sports Poll is a fascinating deep dive into all things sports. We are not ESPN where we care about trades or drafts. We care about the business of sports, the ethics of sports, and the culture of sports. In 2015, we've had previous polls that the majority of the US population were against sports betting. It was culturally not accepted. There were outlier cases, Las Vegas, but you physically needed to be in Las Vegas. There was a lot of friction. You had to fly there. You had to walk into a casino. You had to do some kind of a deposit. You eventually had to make a bet. A lot of those frictions don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Even when sports betting was legalized, it was a slow burn at first. But then the ads started coming.
Oh yes, they did. It seems like everywhere you look, there's an ad for sports, but
We'll make a new bet around every 2 seconds, not only on the game.
oh, we are not doing this again. And you know what I mean.
It's impossible to escape either an ad in between plays or on-air coverage of the actual announcers talking about odds or parlays during the game, pre-game, and post-game. We do 5 polls a year. Almost every poll we do has sports betting questions on it. We are documenting what's happening over time, and we are looking for trends, and we publish all this freely at Seton Hall University. We need everybody to pay attention and everybody to wake up.
Why is it so important that people start paying attention? Well, first, we need to think about how kids are being impacted. Additionally, people seem to believe that legalized sports betting is creating more compulsive gambling. Notably, a significantly higher percentage of sports fans believe this to be true. The group that's most likely to be betting on sports after all. And more people than ever before believe that we're heading towards a compulsive gambling crisis. And look, people are getting absolutely sick of seeing gambling ads. And that really shouldn't be a shocker. Now, to understand this next point, you need to understand the American Gaming Association. I thought that the American Gaming Association existed to protect the fairness of casinos, to make sure that the players were protected, that the casinos were operating fairly, and the games were as the rules of the game said they should be. I literally could not have been more incorrect if I tried. I want to read you the mission statement of the American Gaming Association. It turns out that the mission statement of the AGA is basically make the casinos as much money as possible, because they seek to foster a policy and business environment where regulated gaming thrives. Gaming is this fun little word they use instead of gambling to make it sound like it's, not so bad. Like a nice little video game with your friends. The AGA publishes a ton of research and puts out a lot of statistics about gambling and gambling addiction. Of course, that research never contains anything that would hurt the ability for casinos to make money, because that would go against their mission statement. They'll actually tell you that, hey, gambling ad spend is going down. And they'll make a big deal about it because, as we just learned through the Seton Hall polls, people are sick of being force-fed gambling advertisements. So they put out this article to make sure that you knew that they were spending less money advertising gambling on TV. What they fail to mention is that TV viewership is also down. And then further, the ad spend is just changing location. It's gone from TV to social media, also to streaming services, podcasts, and then gambling influencers who are streaming. Billions of dollars are still being poured into advertising, but the AGA would make you think that advertising is consistently declining because that makes them look better. Ads normalize, apps hook. Then people lose big, and the AGA's big clients make bank. Numbers really can say anything you want them to say, huh? For our next set of numbers, I want to share probably the most disappointing article that I've read. I want to say up front that I have the utmost respect for anyone who's working in the space of helping gambling addicts. We're out there struggling, and to anyone that's putting in the work, I want to tip my hat that I'm not wearing, and I want to thank you for your service. When we have one group telling you to gamble every day, and if you do it, you'll be happy and successful.
Which is still winning. Still better than number 23. A bear being afraid of you.
And then we have another group that's theoretically their counter messaging, telling us that gambling is neither good or bad. People are never actually getting the message that gambling might be a dangerous thing. The narrative is unfortunately completely shaped by the revenues. People are essentially operating in silos, trying to do the best that they can, but they're limited. But this recent article featured the National Council on Problem Gambling, and I think it did really severe damage to their reputation in my eyes. I guess based on this article, we should stop this video, right? I mean, seems like everything's fine. No one's addicted to gambling anymore. We need to call this out for what it is. It's propaganda disguised as public health research. And the National Council on Problem Gambling just handed the gambling industry this on a golden platter to make them look great. According to this article, the NCPG suggests that gambling harm is going down in the United States. And this is despite an explosion in legalized gambling, a huge increase in the amount of advertising that we're seeing across all platforms, and a well-documented surge in people seeking gambling-related help since 2018. The numbers, they don't pass the smell test. They're misleading, and I think anyone that reads this should know it. Let's start with the biggest lie. They're claiming that gambling-related harm went from 7% in 2018 to 11% in 2021, back down to 8% in 2024. And they want us to believe that this drop happened because people just stopped gambling post-pandemic. And all this while the ads are through the roof. You're seeing it every single day. And more people than ever before are seeking help. I mean, I guess unless you ask the AGA their opinion. If you work in this space or you've been half paying attention to gambling addiction over the last few years, you'll know that these numbers just don't make sense. This report makes 0 sense. So where did NCPG get these numbers? A 4-indicator checklist. Translation, cherry-picked vague metrics that paint a particular picture that looks really good on the gambling industry. We know that self-reported surveys are unreliable. They're underreported. The shame and denial are skewing the numbers drastically. Yet, here we are holding up these 4 cherry-picked metrics without naming them, I might add, and saying, look, everything's getting better? There's an avalanche of data contradicting that, but we're ignoring it. I need you to read between the lines. 38 states and DC have legalized online sports betting, and so many are starting to legalize online casino games. Gambling revenue is literally hitting historic highs every single year. The gambling industry is one of the National Council on Problem Gambling's biggest sponsor. And now problem gambling is magically back down to 2018 levels. What a convenient headline to show legislators, regulators, and the media who are finally starting to question the actions of these casinos. They want to paint this narrative that legalization isn't causing a crisis, that everything's fine. The numbers are stable, nothing to see here. Meanwhile, the people that are being harmed, they're buried under debt. They're seeking resources that are ill-funded. They don't know where to get help, and they're too ashamed to speak up. The gambling industry is controlling the conversation, manipulating the narrative, and using organizations like NCPG to launder legitimacy to their profits. The NCPG's job should be to hold the industry accountable, not hand them the keys to the kingdom. There's so many good people in that organization, and I'm calling on them to take a stand and make a difference. They should be shouting from the rooftops about how normalized gambling has gotten, how much the access has increased, and the need for services and help. They handed the gambling industry a get-out-of-jail-free card with this one. But anyone who's lived through a gambling addiction, myself included, we know the truth. The numbers are worse than reported. The harm is significantly deeper than acknowledged. And the gambling industry is 100% controlling the narrative right now. I want to change that. Millions addicted, billions lost. Casinos are setting records with their revenue every single year. Some say it's just business. Others say it's a public health crisis. So, which side are you on? Next episode, we're going to be taking a look at what's being done about the problem in the United States. And we need to finally answer the elephant in the room question that's been evading us all for some reason for the last decade. What does it mean to gamble responsibly? Subscribe so that you don't miss the next episode.
Over the next 5 years, the American people are on course to lose more than $1 trillion of personal wealth to these extreme forms of gambling. That breaks down to about $300,000 every minute.
You know, it's always been the American thing to watch sporting events. I think the sportsbooks have taken that away from families.
It's life-changing financial harm from tens of millions of Americans.